Hello class, welcome back. For video 2, I'm going to be taking us from the Revolution of 1905 all the way to the opening salvo of 1917, which is the February Revolution. But before I do that, I want to make a quick note. I'm going to be using the political terms, conservative and liberal, and I just want to make sure the class understands that I don't mean this in the United States political sense. In the historical case for Russia, when I say the term conservative, it implies people who wanted to maintain the autocratic leadership of the Tsar. And when I use the term liberal, those are individuals who wanted to overthrow the Tsar and establish a democracy. I just wanted to make that clear from the onset. And with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as we talked about in the last video, Russia during this period is marked by an ever-increasing drive for industrialization, and with that, a push of people towards urbanization. And from this, we see a larger sense of a working class consciousness, and as workers gain skills and gain experience, they create a stronger sense of self and a sense of dignity that emerges from that. And because the state was not doing anything to better their conditions, we see a radicalization of workers. And one of the events that triggers a fury of violence and aggression towards the state is this event in January of 1905 called Bloody Sunday, in which there was a mass shooting of workers and their families. Hundreds of people were murdered that day by the state, and all these people were trying to do was to petition the Tsar for economic and political reform. So following this event, we see a large politicalization of workers, peasants, and students, and also those liberals. And this creates a lot of mass action that takes place within these 2 years. There's a call for a general strike in which students close down universities, peasants aren't mowing or picking the crops, and workers shut down factories. And it gets so out of hand that the Tsar has to make concessions, and he establishes the October Manifesto, in which they finally grant civil liberties like the right to protest and the freedom of speech to the population. The second part of this is there's the establishment of an elected Duma. Duma is a parliament like our Congress for the first time. While these concessions were made, more radical wings of political activists weren't happy. They wanted the Tsar to be kicked out of office completely. And so we see this mass insurgent violence in which there's assassinations of state officials, there's bombing of government buildings. But at the same time, this is a response to the large crackdown by the state on workers and political activists. We see the state issuing mass execution orders, mass imprisonment orders, and many untold thousands were forcibly exiled from Russia. But following from this period, we see the establishment of the Duma monarchy period. And this takes us from 1907 to 1917. It's important to note that the Duma, it's fake in a way, in the sense that it really had no political power at all. And this is showcased in the fact that the Tsar Nicholas disbanded the Duma in 1906 and 1907. He also issued new electoral laws which severely restricted the ability to franchise and form political parties. And another factor about the Duma is it was largely a center-right majority, in which these are individuals who were conservative. They were all for the Tsar. They supported the Tsar, and they didn't really want to see any social change. So overall, the system was marred by the fact that it failed. It was gridlocked. Nothing got done. And at the same time as the Duma is basically keeping the country stuck in the 17th in mindset of the 17th century. In the rest of the country, we've seen massive social change. Like we're seeing the spread of education, mass media, entertainment. We see the development of a new professional and middle class, and we also have that working class radicalism. So while the state is acting as if we're still in the 17th century, the rest of the population is going through the processes of modernity, and they're living a 20th century lifestyle. So, like all things, um, violence doesn't stop. And in 1912, we see another massacre of laborers, this time at the Lena Goldfields in Russia. Hundreds of mining workers were shot and murdered. And emerging from this massacre, we see the development of another strike movement, which lasted for 2 years. And really, this strike movement started ratcheting up the pressure. And it looked like in 1914 there was going to be a revolution because everyone was upset. The tension was high, people were in the streets every day, and it looked like the state was falling apart. However, another event happened in 1914. In July, we see the start, of World War One. So a big historiographical question for um, Russian historians is: did the war, World War One, that is, prevent a revolution? So keep that in the back of your thoughts. So with the outbreak of World War One, we see mass political rallies. It's a complete 180 from the days before the war, and we actually see an end of the strike movement because everyone was mobilizing to support the state in what they thought was a just war against foreign aggressors, primarily Germany. So an important thing to keep in mind, this is something that's going on in the background. One of the outcomes of the war and of all these political actions that were taking place up until 1917 is a majority of the Tsar's power came from the people's love of him and the sacred position of the Tsardom. However, Nicholas II, as a leader and as a Tsar, was not very effective, and people's consciousness of the Tsar started to turn sour. Uh, as you remember, we had the 1905 revolution and its bloody suppression of the massacring of many workers. But another factor that comes into play here is the failures of World War One. Like we're seeing catastrophic losses of people and territory. Most of the western half of the empire is lost to the Central Power advance. 3 million people are killed, and another 4 million are wounded, and that's just Russian soldiers. We see an economic collapse, inflation, shortages, social inequalities, and all at the same time, like there's political failures of the government. Like there's no progression being made. They're still basically sitting there twiddling their thumbs that while most of the population is starving. Another factor here is there's an absence of a strong positive vision of a nation. We have so many different political parties because Russia is so vast. We have so many different types of goals of politicians that there's no sense of like what it is to be a Russian citizen, to unite the people. And at the same time, like the Tsar is still attempting to evoke traditional political roles, as seen in this photograph. Like here's soldiers bowing down to um, Tsar Nicholas as he's holding up a religious icon. Because the thing to remember is like religion is the social glue, and it's the force behind the political conservativeness as far as like people wanting to maintain the Tsar and his autocratic rule, because the Tsar in many ways is a symbol of the nation. However, that's starting to break down, and one of the reasons this is breaking down as we talked about with the photo in the last video of the Tsar's family, is this character called Rasputin and the rumors surrounding Rasputin. So Rasputin was a Siberian mystic and a religious leader in a way, but he was also a scoundrel, a drunkard, and a womanizer. And a majority of the population did not like Rasputin. They actually hated him. And Rasputin gained favor with the royal family because he was seen to be able to heal the heir Niki's hemophilia. Anyway, so here in this slide, you can see some pretty crude political cartoons of the period. These are illegal, by the way, but they were widespread. Everyone knew about this. This was like the equivalent of the Wildfire app. Everyone knew, was spreading rumors and all fun nonsense. But the main gist of this is like, if you look at the pictures of the Tsar, which here's the Tsar right here. If you follow my mouse cursor and the Tsar and right here, the Tsar is a simple-minded person in the sense of these depictions. Like here he is sitting on Rasputin's knee. Here he is just like has his hand on Rasputin's shoulder. Rasputin's the main character. He's the one running the show. The other factor about this is there's a lot of rumors spreading about the Tsar's wife, the Tsarina. Many people thought that her and Rasputin were having an affair. And as you can see in this photo, her German ancestry is a huge issue. Like, here's the Tsarina right here, and it's a Rasputin. And here she is holding a picture of her cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the leader of the German Empire. So overall, Rasputin and the rumors around Rasputin hurt the political climate surrounding the Tsar and diminish his power. At the same time, in 1916, right before the revolution, we see this moment in the Duma where a very famous Russian politician named Pavel Milyakov gives a speech in which he asks, I won't read this to you, I'll leave it on the screen for a minute so you guys can look at it, and I'll post the whole speech in the file on e-learning. But he gives a speech where he basically calls out the Tsar and the government, and he asks if everything going on, is it stupidity or is it treason? And the whole Duma erupts in cheers of it's treason, it's stupidity, but that kind of gives you a sense of the political climate and how frustrated people were. At the same time, like the economic crisis, like it's take what's happening currently in the United States and crank it up to 13 on the scale, and that's kind of the sense of how bad it was. Like this weekend I stood in line for like an hour to check out at Costco, but the bread lines in Petrograd were several hours long. Like there was no bread, there was no food, there's shortages of fuel, and at the same time there's strikes going on, and this whole situation was getting pretty wild up, and it was a powder keg. And ultimately what happened, it all came to a head in February of 1917 with the February Revolution. And the main detail and the difference between the October Revolution and the February Revolution is the February Revolution was pretty much everybody, the whole society came out and protested the Tsar and sought to overthrow the Tsar. People were frustrated over the failures of the war, of the shortages of food, the failures of the government, and they just wanted change. So people took to the streets of Petrograd and St. Petersburg and Moscow and demanded the Tsar abdicate from his position. I'm just scrolling through some photos of that day. Here's some postcards from February. And I'm going to leave this right here, and in the following video I will conclude the story and talk about the last give a detailed breakdown of the key events of 1917. But just remember that leading into 1917, there's a vast political powder keg. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.